Hi, I'm Adam Porter and this is my top 100 board game mechanisms of all time. And today we're looking at numbers 40 to 31. So number 40 on the list is probably inspired by my love of Super Bomberman. I played Super Bomberman as a kid an absolute ton, and the thing I really enjoyed about it is that sense of destruction, sheer destruction of the playing space. And you don't get that much in board games, but there are a couple of games which do feature elements like this, sort of. So I'm thinking of the game Survive, Escape from Atlantis, where you're on an island with different tiles representing the different areas of terrain, and on your turn you're removing tiles, which is knocking pieces into the sea where the sharks can attack them and this sort of thing. That wanton destruction and vindictive gameplay as the board is kind of destroyed throughout the game. But equally, you could play a game like Downfall of Pompeii, which goes the other way. This is where we're adding tiles to the board, but the tiles we're adding represent lava, and they're cutting people off from the exits from Pompeii. The first half of the game, you're placing your people out into different buildings, and then the volcano erupts about halfway through the game, and now your people have to get out of the city, and you want to get as many people out as possible. But the other players are trying to cut you off by placing lava and destroying your people, or just cutting off exits and so on and so forth. So some of the feel of Bomberman, where those blocks fall from the sky and reduce your playing space, and everybody gets a bit stressed. Number 39 is equally sort of annoying, I suppose, but a bit less vindictive. This is accidental blocking. So this is in games like Ticket to Ride, where I might form a row of my trains to make my connections, and I accidentally get in somebody else's way. Now I could do it deliberately if I'm really good at the game and I'm really thinking about, okay, I think they're heading for this, but more likely you're just going to accidentally get in someone's way by using a route that they wanted to use, and then they're going to have to adapt their plans. I think that's a really nice level of interaction in games because it's not mean-spirited, it's not vindictive, but it still means you've got to constantly keep thinking, and that what somebody else does directly impacts you. Another game that does this is the game Takenoko, where you're moving the panda around the garden eating bamboo because you've got objectives which say you've got to eat certain colours of bamboo. Meanwhile, another player's got an objective which says that the gardener needs to grow certain colours of bamboo. And so they're moving the gardener around trying to grow it, you're moving the panda around eating it, and you're just getting in each other's way without deliberately trying to step on each other's toes. And I think that makes for a really dynamic gameplay. Number 38 is dice placement. So this is a form of action drafting or action selection where a bunch of dice are rolled, and then you start to use those as essentially as workers. So you're placing them out onto the board in order to claim certain territories, to claim certain rewards, but you might want a certain number to show on your dice in order to place it. Or it may be that the number that you have showing on the dice changes the type of reward that you can get when that dice is placed. So I find it's generally quite a complex game mechanism. It's probably not for casual players or beginners to hobby gaming, but for a sort of meaty strategy game, it does allow lots and lots of design space and lots of nice choices, meaningful decisions in the game. Generally, people think about dice games as being full of randomness, but actually these games generally aren't absolutely full of randomness, because the dice are rolled, and then we determine what we're going to do with those dice, rather than deciding what we want to do and then rolling a dice to see if we can, if you see what I mean. So it's kind of in reverse, the difference between input randomness and output randomness. So dice placement is one of my favourite mechanisms in heavier strategy type games. Next on my list is deck building. So deck building is, I've just found it immediately exciting, immediately engaging. The first time that I played Dominion, it was one of the early games that I played when I first got into kind of the Euro game side of the hobby. For many years I've been playing party games and Games Workshop games and the classic mass market stuff. But one of the first games that really got me into the hobby was Dominion. It was so exciting, this idea of having your own personal deck. That alone is exciting and different to the vast majority of games that I had played in the past. Virtually every game I'd ever played, we had a shared deck that we drew cards from, but here I've got my own deck. But even better, I can adapt that deck. I can add cards to it, I can take cards out of it, and the other player has very little sort of interaction with my deck specifically. That felt great. But even better, the idea in Dominion that we're crafting that deck as we play. It's not a case of before the game we design our own little deck and add cards to it and things like you would in something like Magic the Gathering. No, here the deck is created as we play. We're buying cards from a central pool, we're putting them into our discard pile, and then every now and then our discard pile is getting shuffled up to form our new deck, and so things are being added and the deck's getting better and better. Your turns get better and better. There's a real sense of momentum as you play the game. So this, of course, is not just featured in Dominion, although that was the first to really make it the centre of a game, but it went on to be adapted into all sorts of different mechanisms like bag building, which you see in Quacks of Quedlinburg. Essentially the same thing, but here we're drawing little tokens from a bag rather than drawing cards from a deck. It got incorporated into other genres like hardback or paperback, where we're creating words by buying letters and adding them to our deck, so each round new letters are coming out and then we'll be able to create words, spell them out with these letters. I've mentioned this hardback in a previous one of these lists. Games with a board but with a deck building aspect to it, so something like Undaunted Normandy or Undaunted North Africa, where the deck building is just a way of driving the action of moving your soldiers around the map, around the terrain, and shooting at each other, and all the different actions that these soldiers get up to, controlled by a deck building mechanism. That's refreshing. It's a very different way of controlling the pieces on the board that doesn't require traditional card play or traditional use of dice, for example. Number 36 is quite a specific one. I say it's quite specific because I can only think of one game or two games that actually use this mechanism, and they're essentially very similar games by the same designer. So this is partial shared information. The game Haben Gut is one of my absolute favourite games because of two mechanisms, and this is the first of those mechanisms. So in Haben Gut, we're controlling stock prices and we're purchasing stocks that we're going to keep in front of us. It's a relatively simple game, one of the lightest stock market games that I've played. So you're buying stocks and then you're trying to obviously buy them when they're low, low in cost, and then sell them when they're high in value. And you want to manipulate those prices. But you've got two sets of information, one between you and the player on your right, and one between you and the player on your left. And that's a little pool of cards that's positioned between you, physically positioned between you and the next player. And both of you can access those cards and manipulate the stock market. But when you play cards, you're going to play one from the left and one from the right. One of those cards is going to be played at full power, the other one is going to be played at half power. So even the player to your right or the player to your left can manipulate those cards a little bit and affect how things work. They've got different powers to you. But they've of course got different information to you. They've got half the same information, but they've also got another set of cards to their left or their right, which you can't see. So everybody's got a bit of the same information, a bit of different information, and it makes the game really, really intriguing. You've got a feel for what's going on. You can predict the future to some degree, but so can everybody else, and they've got different information to you. I find that really, really intriguing as a mechanism. It was re-employed. This is by the designer Carlo Rossi, and he re-employed that mechanism in the game Divinity Derby, which is a racing game that uses exactly the same mechanism of the cards to your left and your right. I didn't enjoy Divinity Derby as much, I suppose. I like racing games, as I've already mentioned on this list, but I really, really like stock market games, and so I kind of felt like it was a lackluster version of Haben Gut, so I'd always go for Haben Gut over Divinity Derby. But either game, you'll have a great time with it if you can't. Haben Gut is very hard to get hold of. It's been out of print for a long time and it's only ever released in Germany. But Divinity Derby might be a bit easier to get hold of if you're interested in that mechanism. Number 35 is a time track. So a time track is where players are in order, going around a track of some sort, so the player pieces are in some sort of order, and the person whose turn it doesn't go clockwise around the table. The next person's turn is the person who is furthest back on the track, and they can jump as far as they want on the track in order to take some sort of action. So they might jump way ahead of everybody else, or they might just move a tiny little bit. If they just move a tiny little bit, they might still be at the back of the track, which means they're going to get another go, and potentially another go, before the players who are at the front get to go again. Okay, so jumping way ahead and getting the best possible actions is fantastic. You get great stuff before anybody else, but you might be handing them a bunch more turns than you have in the game. So essentially you're using time as a currency. It's also used in the games Tokaido, which is quite a relaxing, simple set collection game. Patchwork uses it really effectively. So here we're buying patches to go onto our quilt. Again, it's a tile laying game, but this time with polyominoes. And each of the tiles that you take has a cost in terms of time. And so it's going to advance you a certain position up the track. Now you might take one which is nice and cheap, doesn't cost you much time at all, fantastic. Or you might take one which costs you loads of time, but it's exactly the piece that you want. But now your opponent has several turns before it comes back to you. Next on the list is Physicality. Now this is a very broad category, isn't it? I've called it Physicality, but it's a very broad category. What I'm talking about is games that get you up and being physical, maybe getting you up on your feet, moving around the table. Maybe it's games that get you contorting yourself in some way. So something like Yogi. Okay, in Yogi we draw a card, it tells us we have to put that card somewhere on our body. So we position it behind our ear or whatever, or under our elbow, or under our armpit, or something like that, and it has to stay there. And so in the next turn we're trying to take a card, but we've got a card positioned somewhere else in our body, and if we ever drop any cards, we're eliminated from the game. It's a very simple system, but really, really fun and satisfying. Equally, I really enjoy games like Happy Salmon, where we've got a hand of cards, or a little mini deck of cards, and we're drawing a card and it tells us we have to fist bump somebody. And so we're looking around the table for somebody else who's also looking to fist bump, and so we fist bump them, we throw away our cards, and now the next one we've got to give someone a high five. So we're calling out high five, high five. Has anyone else got a high five card? You give them a high five, you throw away your cards. The next one says switcheroo, you've got to swap places with somebody around the table. Or Happy Salmon, where you've got to slap each other's wrists. And so everybody's running around a table, shouting over each other, trying to find the people with the same card, and it's all over in, I don't know, 30 seconds or a minute. I really enjoy games of Happy Salmon. It's really invigorating, it's great with young players. I've played it with my German family and my English family, who can't speak to each other because they don't speak the same language, but they could all play Happy Salmon together. So that was a fantastic experience. Other games, I suppose, was treading slightly outside of the board game world here into Cross Boule. Okay, Cross Boule is, the reason I include it is because it's produced by Zoc Verlag or Norris Spieler, who are, I consider them a board game company. So I love Zoc Verlag. I follow their range. I buy lots of their games, and Cross Boule is excellent. It's essentially a bunch of little bean bags. You get them in all sorts of different varieties of nice patterns, and you can choose the pattern that you want and so on. But you can adapt the rules of the game, but essentially because they're soft, these things are easy to throw, and they're not going to damage anything or hurt anybody. And so you set up some sort of rules or limitation, but what you're trying to do really is get the tiny little ball, chuck that, and then everybody else throws their bigger beanbags, and they're trying to land it as close to that ball as possible. You could position it so that it's on some sort of, I don't know, some sort of piece of, I was going to call it terrain, that's a very board gamey term, isn't it? Some piece of furniture or a wall or some sort of object out and about in the street, or you could play it in your house. You could make up rules about throwing these balls in a certain way. You've got to throw it under one leg, or you've got to throw it overarm, or whatever it is, throw it with your eyes closed, okay? And actually, a really fun way of playing it is kind of making up the rules as you go along. On your turn, you have to come up with a rule which everybody has to use for that particular round, and then another player makes up a rule. It's very, very adaptable, it's very silly, but it's really physical and it's a fun game. Number 33 is the Yahtzee mechanism. Now, there's probably an official term or something that's kind of accepted now by game designers as the term for rolling dice and re-rolling them a number of times, but everyone just knows it as the Yahtzee mechanism, I think. That's what I think of it as. So this is the kind of mechanism where, yeah, we roll a bunch of dice, we can re-roll them 2, maybe 3 times, and then that's our final set of dice. Each time, of course, we can lock certain dice, so we don't have to re-roll everything. We can keep the bits that we want, and we're trying to create certain sets of dice in order to achieve points. That's the simple basics of Yahtzee. This is used in games like King of Tokyo, which is a very attacky game where we're rolling dice and then we're trying to gather up power and energy to use special cards, or maybe we're just going for straight out hits on the opponent to knock them out of New York or Tokyo. And I find it particularly satisfying in the game Dice Town, which is where everybody is doing this simultaneously. That's what I love about Dice Town. Everyone's got their own set of poker dice, and they're rolling them all at the same time. You're not having to wait for somebody else to to take their turn. One thing with these Yahtzee type games is if there's just one set of dice and you take it in turns, it can be quite a long process while you're waiting for somebody. They're rolling the dice, thinking about what they want to keep. Oh, they're rolling again. Like now they're rolling again, and you're just sat there. There's nothing you can do. There's nothing you can plan because they're quite chaotic type games and you don't really know what you're going to get when it's your turn. So having a game like Dice Town where everybody's rolling simultaneously and then we compare our results and see what we get makes the game really, really fast moving and energetic. Number 32 is construct or draw and then guess. Okay, so I'm talking about games where we're either drawing a picture and then the other players have to guess what we've drawn, or maybe we're moulding something out of clay and then everybody else has to guess what we've made. Or it could be, for example, in the game Leglos, which is a favourite game of mine from Zoc Verlag again. In Leglos, we're laying out sticks and discs and we're making a picture, and you've got to kind of recognise which picture we're trying to represent from a grid of different pictures. I believe the recent Spielder's Jahreswinner Pictures, I haven't played that, but I believe it works in a relatively similar sort of way. I suppose this is a variation on charades, really, where we're constructing something with our bodies. You know, we're holding a pose, and other people have to, or we're doing an action, and other people have to guess what we're doing. But I do really enjoy that. I enjoy that kind of guessing, looking at things that people have creatively come up with. You know, how have they interpreted it, and how are they trying to put things across to us? What are they trying to say? I find that fascinating, and it's always a fun party time. There's a lot of familiarity here as well, nostalgia, going back to games that I played as a kid, games I played with my family at Christmas and things like this, often would be around this genre of games. And of course, my own game, Doodle Rush, is one of these games where you have to guess the pictures that other people have drawn. And Doodle Rush was inspired, the design of Doodle Rush was inspired by Happy Salmon, which I've mentioned previously. You know, what would Happy Salmon be if it was a drawing game? Well, you'd have everyone drawing pictures as fast as they possibly could, and then swapping pictures and running around a table and trying to guess each other's pictures and then throwing away the cards. And you know, that's exactly what Doodle Rush is. It takes 6 minutes to play, which is 3 rounds of drawing, 1 minute each, and 3 rounds of guessing, 1 minute each. So it's super fast, super quick, chaotic, but all the fun of something longer like Pictionary compacted into that 6 minute slot. And number 31 is storytelling and creativity. So this is, again, quite a broad category. It could be something like Untold, Adventures Await. So in Untold, Adventures Await, we're literally sitting around telling a story together, making it up as we go along, cooperatively. It's barely a game, okay? It's something where there's no competition there. We're just trying to tell the best possible story. So essentially it's a cooperative activity. But we're powering it, this story, the engine for it comes from rolling Rory's story cubes. And these are just the most fantastic little components that I've found in games. I absolutely love them. I've got a massive set of Rory story cubes. Each cube has 6 different images on it. They're all different. Every cube is different. I've got loads of them. And so you roll dice and then these cubes, and then you've got a bunch of pictures and you interpret them in different ways. And some of these pictures are just abstract enough that you might be able to read it as one thing if it's one way, or one thing if it's the other way, or one player might look at it and see something which you don't see. And when you put 2 of them together, then that creates some unique combination that you hadn't thought of previously. It's a really fascinating thing, storytelling as games. I used to be an actor years ago, and I used to do a lot of improvisational sort of theatre, improvisational comedy and things like that. I wasn't terribly good at it, but I really, really got involved in storytelling and how storytelling works. And this game really gave me a chance to kind of stretch those muscles again. Other games with creativity in them that I really love, Cyrano is a real favourite of mine, a great party game where you have to write poems. You're basically given a rhyming scheme. You've got to use this rhyme and this other rhyme in 2 rhyming couplets, and you have to use the most obscure words. So you've got to try and use a word that nobody else around the table has used in order to score points. And the poems that people write are hilarious, you know. Of course, it's not a game for everybody, because you're going to put this in front of some people and they're just going to go, I don't want to write a poem. And also it's quite a quiet party game because a lot of it is sat there trying to come up with something, writing something. It's not the most lively of party games, but when people read out their poems, it's hilarious. People are falling around laughing. So you've got that long quiet spell and then the bursts of laughter. I don't suppose this game is going to come back anytime soon because I can't imagine it's got a massive market for people who would like this sort of thing. But I really am part of that market. I do like this sort of creativity in games. And of course, as well as counting down my top 100 board game mechanisms of all time, we're also counting down my 10 board game mechanisms that I really don't enjoy. And today we're at number 4. And my number 4 mechanism, I think it's the best example of a mechanism which is there purely to simulate real life. Because it's not a fun mechanism. It's a fiddly mechanism, it gets in the way, it's frustrating, it's complicated, it's different in every game. It's purely there as a simulation. I like games which embrace abstraction. Yeah, they prioritize gameplay, satisfying gameplay over real life simulation. So anyway, what is the mechanism? The mechanism is line of sight. This is what line of sight is where you've got a playing piece on the board and it's going to shoot at another playing piece. Okay, but that playing piece might be behind some sort of terrain. And that terrain might not even be physical terrain, it might just be drawn on the board or something like that, which makes things even more complicated. And you've got to work out, can that playing piece see that other playing piece? Of course, playing pieces are, I mean, they're representing people who can move, they can reach out from behind that wall, they can see, but then maybe they'll get shot if they do that, or maybe they're hiding behind that wall and they can't be seen. And so we've got to abstract that down. So we end up with mechanisms where we say, right, well, you take a center of your square on the grid and you draw a line. If you draw a straight line from the center of that point to the center of a point on that other square, does it contact a wall or another piece of terrain? It sort of does on the corner, but it's not crossing through it. Ah, well, if it touches on the corner, that's okay. If it's crossing through the wall, it can't be seen. But another game says, no, it can't touch on the corner. And what about if there's a playing piece in the way? So it's not a wall or a piece of terrain. Can I see through that other playing piece? Presumably that person can move around and get out of the way and so on. Ah, well, in some games, you can't see through that playing piece. In other games, you can see through that playing piece. Or maybe you can see through that playing piece if it's one of your own army. It's a friendly unit, but you can't see through that playing piece if it's an enemy unit. Oh, it's so frustrating. It just gets in the way. It's not fun. I don't have a solution. I'm not saying don't use line of sight. I mean, people want simulation in these games. Of course they do. We're trying to represent something focused, aren't we? We're really honing it. We talked about this in the grid-based, where I was talking about grid-based movement. It's really focusing in on individual characters and what they're doing, moving around a real space. We're not looking at countries here, like in Pandemic, where we've got a map of the world and we're looking at cubes and a player pawn, and we're actually looking at individuals within a specific space. So it's got to be realistic. Oh, but line of sight is a bore. I'm not going to go on about it anymore because I'm becoming a bit of a bore here. Anyway, I hope you enjoyed this video. Let me know what you think of the mechanisms I've talked about today. Come and join me for the next installment. If you're new to the channel, thanks so much for watching. Please stick around, please subscribe, and please comment and say hello. I really like to hear from people. That's the main thing that keeps me doing these videos, is interacting with all of you. I'll see you next time. All the best.